what we find is the real agents for change, the real heroes in the circular economy are not people who are doing the remanufacturing. It's those individuals that say, I wonder if there's a circular solution to this.
Welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast exploring how to balance profit with purpose in an increasingly complex world. I'm Charlie Martin, your host and founder of TrueMark, the mark of trusted sustainability communications. Our article this week is titled The Circular Economy Growth Plan, which is a look at the UK government's push to replace the old take, make, dispose economy with systems built around reuse, repair, and responsibility for the full life of products. And I'm absolutely thrilled to say I've got a real expert in the room today to unpack all of this. In my guest, Dr. Greg Lavery, Circular Economy Advisor, founder of Rype Office, and a member of the UK government's Circular Economy Taskforce, helping design the National Circular Economy Growth Plan. Greg, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to be here.
Now, Greg, as I mentioned, I've managed to get like a proper expert in the room to unpack all things circular economy, which I'm really excited about. Because I have to admit that I definitely think I'm one of those people that's got that sort of dangerous level of knowledge and understanding about all things circular. So hopefully today we'll be able to unpack perhaps some of those misconceptions that I myself have. But before we do so, can we understand a little bit more about Rype Office and what you guys are all about?
Yeah, good question. So 10 years ago, we realized that there was a ridiculous amount of waste going on in the office furniture world. So what typically happens is a company will take a lease for a building, for a space. At the end of that lease, right, we're going to take a new office. They sign a new lease. They buy all new furniture for that. And then typically that furniture goes to either landfill or recycling. The statistics are astonishing. 300 tons every single working day in the UK goes to landfill of office furniture. Isn't that extraordinary, right? Another 200 tons goes to recycling, and some of that is some of the world's best furniture. It's just extraordinary. It's incredibly wasteful. And so just over 10 years ago, myself and a couple others said, this just isn't good enough. We are doing the world a real disservice. The embodied emissions are massive from doing that. The cost is enormous. The opportunity for employment is great. And of course, the waste involved in that is terrible, especially when we're a nation which is pretty short on natural resources, which means that everything that goes into a chair or a desk or a sofa has come from some faraway land. It's been worked on. Someone's taken a profit margin. It's then been sent to another country for refining. Someone else takes a margin. Then it gets moved. Someone takes a margin on that. So it's driving up the costs, but it's also making us very dependent on other nations. And as we speak, the war in Iran is now starting to create some real issues with international transport, not least of which because of the increased fuel price, but also because that international supply chain uncertainty is very difficult.
Greg, let me ask you this. That's 10 years ago that you observed that incredibly wasteful scenario within the office furniture sort of industry. Can you remember exactly kind of where you were and sort of what was it that drew your attention to this as a problem? Can you just talk us through that moment of, wow, there's a real problem here. I need to do something to address it.
Yeah, I think my environmental journey started probably in 1994, and I'll tell you the story of that. I mean, that was an extraordinary circumstance. So I was working in Hong Kong. Imagine me sitting on the 52nd floor of a skyscraper office building in the midst of Hong Kong, designing for the Philippines in a coal-fired power station, right? Not a great thing to be doing, but the Philippines, don't get me wrong, thousands of kilometers away. Here I was sitting in a really posh office in Hong Kong. And my job was to design some of the civil engineering infrastructure. I was an engineer in those days, so still sort of am. And the question came to me, okay, Greg, we need you to design a basin to hold some of the essentially the tailings of the power station. Now, don't get me wrong, it was designed by Mitsubishi and Black & Veatch, so it had a scrubber, so it took all the NOx and the SOx out of the flue that went up the chimney. And that was put into a slurry. And my job was to design this, what's called an attenuation basin, where you put that slurry and then it dries up and then it settles down, right? And obviously there's a residue there. So I said to my boss, well, okay, how many years do you want me to design this big, essentially massive swimming pool to last for? Because we knew the volumes that were coming through and how much % water is. And he said, oh, let me talk to the client. So we went to the client and came back the next week, said, Greg, 7 years. And I said, okay, I can do that. But hang on a minute, aren't we designing this power station for 50 years? Oh, let me talk to the client. So a week later, I get the answer back from the client. Oh, they won't own the power station after 7 years, right? It's like, oh, come on, that's not the right answer, right? So I was really frustrated. And then the story of this power station, it was built, it was unfolded. You wouldn't read about it in a Hollywood movie. They literally forced a local village off this island where they're putting the power station at gunpoint. They razed it, as in knocked it down flat, all the rainforest. They blew up a coral reef so a coal barge could get in to fuel this power station. And it was all in the name of helping the Philippines to develop with a reliable power source, right? And I just thought, that's not good enough, right? We have to do better than that as designers. So I then started a PhD to look at how we can, as designers, do things that are more sustainable in a way that everybody wins. And that's been sort of my career journey for the last, 33, 34 years since I started that, is how do you find those win-wins? Now, part of it is sort of getting that business model thinking, doing so. I was a management consultant for a while to understand how business works, because actually, if you look at that engineering scenario, the problem was not necessarily the designers. The problem was also the client taking the sort of time frame around that. Now, I'm not going to name names. It was just a shocking, as a young engineer, shocking experience to go through, to say, surely we can do better than this.
Can you recall, what were your colleagues' reaction to this? Was there a collective concern, or was this something that you were kind of out there on your own raising this issue, and ultimately then, inspiring you to go on and do something like, the PhD that you did next? Was that common in terms of that reaction?
Yeah, I think especially in those days, there was, remember, tobacco the industry was refusing to believe that caused cancer. There was a lot of denialism going on. And whilst the prospect of carbon emissions had been raised, no one was taking it very seriously. And I think that was in an era of very sort of development-centric thinking. And the logic was pretty straightforward. If you're in the Philippines, you can't grow your economy unless you have reliable power. In those days, there was a series of brownouts that would happen on a daily basis. So you would be without electricity for 4 hours. So how can you reliably build any form of manufacturing or production if you don't have reliable power? And that brownout moved around during the day, depending on which day of the week, in a very unpredictable way. And the logic said, what we need is cheap power, which at the time was coal, and we need to get that to the back blocks of the Philippines, because that will drive economic development. And you can't fault the logic. It was all about making people's lives better through economic development and therefore higher standard of living. But at the time, to your question, no one on my team or the client clearly was concerned about the environmental impact or the social impacts of displacing people. It was just the way business was done. Fortunately, times are a lot more enlightened now.
And Greg, it sounds to me like when you described that the really because you presumably you were a sort of an environmentally conscious person yourself at the time, so you were obviously aware of what you were doing and what you were building. But it sounds like the real trigger point was the lack of kind of responsibility shown by the client to the kind of stewardship of the impact of what they were going to be doing long term from that 7 to 50 year cycle. Was that the point where you said, look, it's one thing building these things in order to stimulate development and growth and, economic outcomes. It's a whole nother thing to do so and wipe your hands of it when it becomes not your issue, and not to plan that into your thinking when building it. Was that the key turning point?
Yeah, exactly. That, for me, light bulb went on, said in the built environment, we have to do something better. And then fast forward to sort of 10 or so years ago, And that light bulb went on again, right? It's okay, furniture is the chance. Now, don't get me wrong. If I had then taken my PhD and started up an architectural practice or something around sustainable and circular design, which is what I studied, if I'd done that then, I would have no money, right? I mean, you couldn't make a living from that. There were a few people trying, but they closed down their practices very quickly. That was a difficult time. Here we are. These days, we're thinking very differently about it, and I think this leads really nicely to the sort of government circular economy growth plan thinking. But before we get there, let's stop sort of 10 years ago, recognize that this same waste that was occurring of resources and environment that I saw back in the 90s in this power station scenario is happening in furniture, where people are just denying the fact and out of sight, out of mind, the linear economy of take, make, and dispose that you described earlier exactly was happening, and people weren't caring about that, right? So we said, let's apply some real engineering know-how here, proper material sciences, so that we can bring an item of furniture back to new. It's not good enough, in our view, to address the maybe 10% of the market, which is secondhand furniture. I mean, that's a well-addressed market. There's guys that do that very efficiently. What we want to be doing is displacing that new furniture that's come from an iron ore mine originally in South Africa, via China where the smelting occurred, via somewhere else where the shaping occurred, via Poland where the final finishing is occurring and then being transported into the UK. Let's displace all of that by trying to do things really properly in a circular economy and create items of furniture that are the same in performance and appearance as new, so that we can displace that. And that's, here we are now 10 years later. We've, with some help from Innovate UK grants, hats off to them, thank you very much, for things like how you take scratches out of plastic. We've got 4 different ways of doing that can be done non-toxically at room temperature by someone who's semi-skilled at a really good low price. So what we're able to do now is take a whole office of furniture and then help a client to distill some of that into the design of their new office, add to that externally sourced remanufactured furniture. So there's a huge supply coming out of central London and most cities. We capture the best of that and remanufacture that, put that together with maybe a little bit of new to top up. And then you've got typically sort of 40% clients' old furniture that looks completely different because we've recolored it, we've reupholstered it, whatever. Another 40% that might have sat in the offices of the Economist Group, like behind me, that's their new office where we did all that remanufactured furniture. And then maybe 10 or so percent new stuff to add on to that. What you get is a beautiful office, no compromise on appearance, on quality or performance, and yet it's typically, compared with what you would pay at a wholesale rate, still 20% cheaper, 80% smaller environmental footprint, and 80% waste avoided.
And you're using the term remanufacturing. Am I being too simple in reinterpreting that as sort of repurposed, or is that completely different?
Yeah, and you're touching on a really important point here, is that a lot of people think that the circular economy is just recycling. But actually, if you look into the academic literature, there's actually what they call the 10 R's. So the first one is rethink. Do we need to do something the way we've been doing? So for instance, there's a lot of waste in how things are designed. Do we need something that's quite that big? I mean, a classic case would be in transport. Do you really need a 3-ton four-wheel drive with all of the off-roading capability to commute every day on a paved road, right? I mean, if you redesigned in your mind your transport needs, you wouldn't design something like that, right? So there's redesign and then rethink, do we even need stuff? And then what else is there? Repair, refurbish, and then remanufacture. And then you've got reuses in there, and down the bottom are things like, and it really is a hierarchy of good to bad, good at the top where you rethink and avoid stuff, right down the bottom to recycle, which is the sort of not in the world of the circular economy, that's the sort of last resort. And remanufacturing is somewhere in there in the middle, where it's all about taking something and bringing it back to new condition, which requires a bit more emissions, but not much more than actually not doing anything at all to it and reusing it. However, the reuse involves a quality compromise in many instances, because there might be dents and scratches and whatever in that, wear and tear.
I see. So remanufactured is essentially just a a better quality output in terms of the final version of the product than reuse, where you're essentially not working with it to get it back to scratch, back to its normal.
Exactly, and that's sort of the term remanufacturing. And remanufacturing is manufacturing within remanufacturing. It's all about bringing it back to new condition. And our belief right from the outset is if 90% of the market wants new or as new furniture, we need to be serving that market if we're going to create significant change in the way furniture is dealt with.
Hear, hear. You get your first hear of the show, Greg. I think that's so spot on. I want to ask you, and I think this is going to lend itself nicely to us getting to the article and talking about some of the themes in it. Why aren't more organizations already then doing this? Like, why isn't it the sort of or is it? Perhaps you're going to tell me that yes, we've already got to the point where businesses are already adopting this when it comes to their furniture. But why isn't the uptake at where it perhaps might be in the future?
Yeah, I think it's just an education thing, right? Because if we go back to our sort of grandparents' times and their parents' times, they bought stuff and bought it to last, even in their offices, right? And their homes. All of the furniture was designed so that it could be repaired. I mean, you think about the oak tables that are handed down from generation to generation. I mean, those are designed so that you can sand them down and repair them and fill the scratches, all those sorts of things. I think since the 80s, we've adopted a very consumptive lifestyle with globalization and easy production and cheap Chinese and Asian made stuff. We've become a really high disposal society. And that's, by the way, that's only the Western world, right? If you go to India or Africa, there's people working beside the road fixing stuff all the time, right? Their economies are incredibly circular. We have just had too much money, basically, and we've wasted our resources and created a whole lot of problems for ourselves in doing that with high embodied carbon and enormous landfills. I mean, the volume of waste that the UK has buried or put into different tips is absolutely astonishing, and that's what the government wants to address, right? That's just incredibly wasteful on all levels for the economy, for society, and for materials. On the other hand, there are some sectors of the economy that are already incredibly circular. So not many people know, but those big white photocopiers in offices, typically by Kyocera, Ricoh, all the big brands, typically they've seen 8 offices. So actually, the degree of remanufacturing of those is incredible, but it doesn't go on. It's sort of hiding in plain sight, as they say. So what would happen is, now, in the old days, if you had a £5 part, like let's say a plastic cog or something that broke, 20 years ago, you would have to buy another £1,500 photocopier to replace it. Nowadays, everything is pay per page, and that's because the photocopier manufacturers make their photocopiers last incredibly long, and they've done really incredibly clever things. So all of the software is forward and backward integrated, all of the parts are forward and backward integrated, and so it's and now they have maintenance technicians that they know which parts are going to break, so they go ahead and ahead of time they actually replace those through this routine maintenance. So it's a very sophisticated, incredible way. Similarly, Rolls-Royce, the aero engine manufacturer, not the car manufacturer, there is a particular type of engine or a family of engines called the Trent engine. And that's used for passenger jets, the really big ones, all those big Rolls-Royce engines. Not one single one of those engines is owned by an airline or a plane company. Rolls-Royce owns every single one of them. And they've designed them to last an incredibly long time, and they maintain them. And what they're actually offering to the airlines and what airlines pay for is what they call power by the hour. So they've gone to an even more evolved generation of circularity where it's a service, and the term is servitization. They've servitized aero engines so that they can hold on to and make those engines last. And of course, if you're Rolls-Royce and you own those engines, you're going to do everything you can to design those to last an incredibly long time. So that sort of thinking is hidden in plain sight all around our society. It just so happens that at the furniture side of things, in our little sector, no one's really taking it on seriously because it's just the way things always happen. And I think it's just a function of change. People aren't aware of it. They're not confident that they can get high quality. You've got an industry that is trapped in a linear model. And if you are a manufacturer and you've got a big plant in Eastern Europe with a centralized production, model, you're not set up to take furniture back and remanufacture it. So what you want to do is sell more new stuff. And how do you do that? Well, you rely on fast fashion. And every year you bring out a new colour. And then at Clerkenwell Design Week or the Milan Furniture Fair, you talk about how everyone has to be this new colour. And that unfortunately the design community tend to buy that. And so they go back to their clients and say, you can't possibly use your existing furniture because it's not in this year's fashion colour. Forgetting, of course, that next year that's also out of fashion. So the whole fashion world is forcing this whole fast fashion and therefore wastage model because manufacturers would prefer in their linear world to sell new stuff because that's what they've been set up to do.
I want to come back to your point. I can't remember exactly the term that you used, but that model of manufacturers essentially having their business models built around building quality, long-term products that are then ultimately sold almost as a service to their
servitization. Yeah,
servitization, exactly, as you described it. Like, is that applicable to the office furniture industry?
We offer that. Many clients don't take it up, but what's happening, I'm not sure if your listeners will be aware, but there is an enormous trend towards serviced offices right now. And so the statistic I saw in a report is that currently let's take central London, it's about 21% of all office space is serviced, as in not owned by or rented by the occupant, but there is a serviced office provider in the middle. And that's predicted to grow to 30% by 2030, and other pundits are saying that it's going to be even higher than that. So that's an enormous trend. The good news is serviced office operators don't want to have to pay for the furniture up front, and they want it to last as long as possible and be forward and backward integratable depending on who moves in and out. Therefore, what we're able to do to them is say, how would you like us to provide furniture and take some away and put it back and meet the client's needs and do design, everything for a one-off fee in a pounds per square foot basis. On a monthly basis, right? Pounds per square foot per month, which is perfect for a serviced office operator because they don't want to pay up front. They want to pay as their tenants are paying, which is on a monthly basis. All that works beautifully. And so we've just signed up with a leading serviced office provider to help them do exactly that. And they're delighted. They don't want to have to mess around with furniture. We've got a fantastic software system that means that if there's a chair broken, they just push a button. And so scan the QR code on the bottom, push the button, we get notified and we come and fix it.
I have to admit, I am fully sold. I'm sure any of our listeners listening in thinking, hopefully have been really inspired by what you've said in terms of thinking about what other areas are there, that I can immediately think of where that kind of model could be applied. I think it's as you say, it's an education piece. It's a stimulating, innovative thinking piece that kind of needs to happen. Let's move forward, though, now, if possible, and talk about the article. I'm really interested to get your view on this as somebody who's literally worked on, what the article's alluding to from the inside. But would you mind just providing a bit of a summary for our listeners and viewers, and then just picking out from the article whatever you thought was most interesting?
Yeah, so you're referring to the Circular Economy Growth Plan, which is the title of the article. It's available online. It was written by the European Recycling Platform, dated 12th of February this year. What it talks about is a process that's been going on in the background where the government, the new government, remember they're only a year and a half old, when they first came into power, they recognised that we are a nation dependent on external countries for our resources, and that's costing the economy quite a lot of money, especially when disruptions occur. But it's also costing jobs because over the last 20 or 30 years, all that offshoring of production has meant that jobs have gone overseas, right, which is hurting the UK. So the government said, okay, how are we going to do things differently? And what's more, they also recognised as a new government that there was a little bit of public trust that had been lost in policy making. So they took the bold step of contacting and building a task force of 20 non-government people who have experience in the circular economy, a combination of academics, of industry experts, of community representatives, and of sectoral representatives as well, and put us all together to say, how can we create a plan for the UK economy to drive us from that linear economy into a more circular one, which will also have the benefits of saving money on the cost of living, reducing the national debt, ultimately improving our balance of payments, which means we need to import less and we can export more, which is all good for GDP, I might add. At the same time, relieving our waste problems and the enormous amount that's going to landfill, reducing our carbon emissions, because remember, they are legally bound with every government to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050, and create jobs.
I mean, I have to admit, as somebody living in and operating within this economy, like I was really encouraged, as you've alluded to hear that this was happening. My immediate thought was, it's great there's a task force, but when are we going to see some actual impact of the investment that's been made into this? Like, when is it going to start happening? Where are we in terms of...
I'll give you an exact update on where we are. So the papers have been written, including the actual growth plan, as well as a series of roadmaps for each of those 6 sectors. They are now undergoing government review. You can imagine the government is a little distracted right now because there's a whole lot of foreign uncertainty going on. I believe the intention is that we're not far, maybe a month or so from release, and we're looking forward to that. What personally I'm quite pleased about is that it's not just a bunch of stuffy recommendations. It's actually very sort of grassroots trying to drive change. And I'll give you an example on that. So as part of the work and in concert with the government's aims, the government has also been reviewing the government buying standards to improve the circularity in those. And frankly, they'll save a ton of money in that. They'll also reduce carbon emissions, create local jobs, etc. Right? So it's a really positive thing to do. So we expect that as part of that release, the new government buying standards will also come out at the same time, which will use the government's spending power, which is something like £220 billion per year, to lead the circular economy and show what's possible. So, for instance, they have signed a contract already for the DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which has 34,000 staff. And this contract relates to their IT, so essentially their laptops. The contract says, you, the company who's been awarded, look after our laptops for the next X years, but you are not allowed to buy one single new laptop. So what that's done is a couple of really interesting things. So, and the government did a lot of research before they made that decision. And what they found is that there's a couple of providers of remanufactured laptops. They researched the standards of and the quality of those and found that they're just as good as new. There was no reason why they wouldn't do it. So they took the bold step of now signing up this new provider to make sure that every one of the laptops is second life. In other words, remanufactured. That's going to save the government a huge amount of money. It's also leading the whole industry in computers to say, well, look, if you're a small, medium enterprise or even a big corporate, if we as the government have done this, we've stimulated the whole sector of second life computing. We've encouraged the quality standards to stay nice and high. We've provided some funding through those purchases that keep driving improvement in quality and also reduce cost. So they've actually kickstarted a whole new movement as a result of that one contract decision, which will have ripples all around society and hopefully drive a lot more people to think about circular computing.
Here. Second here, Greg. I love it. I love to hear that. And it's a good, I mean, I have to say, at a time when, from a personal viewpoint here, that, faith and confidence in our government is perhaps at a struggling point, if you like. It's absolutely fantastic to hear that they made decisions such as this, because it just makes absolute sense. Out of interest, if we've got that kind of top-down influence, if you like, of the government and their purchasing power and the decisions that they make about who they buy from and the implications of that, as you've just described. The other kind of key that you've described to me today in terms of how do we get from where we are right now to where we want to get to is education. Like, what can be done on the education of, people around the impact of the circular economy and how to adopt circular principles into their own businesses? Because I have to admit today, even you taking me through like half an hour's worth of like, essentially why it works and how it can work. I'm fully inspired to think about how this could be adopted in our own world. So what are the other things that can be done in order to educate and inspire others to think about this?
Yeah, a really good question. At the end of the day, what we're finding is the real agents for change are individuals like yourself that say there must be a better way of doing this and refuse to listen to the naysayers, which is frankly most of the existing manufacturers of most products. They are so deeply embedded in the linear economy, right down to the fact, and you can't blame salespeople, because if your bonus and therefore your skiing holiday depended on selling more new stuff, of course you're incentivized to sell more new stuff because your quality of living decreases if you don't get your bonus, right? Totally get that. And therefore, you can't rely on manufacturers to come up with solutions, and especially circular solutions, because they're incentivized not to. Therefore, what we find is the real agents for change, the real heroes in the circular economy are not people who are doing the remanufacturing. It's those individuals that say, I wonder if there's a circular solution to this that might be a better way. And by the way, it's not the oldies, right? It's the younger generations that are coming through, that are moving into positions of decision making, that are saying, it's not good enough. And if what encourages me enormously is the success of Depop and Vinted, where individuals in the younger generations, and by younger I mean sort of anyone 45 and younger, and now the take-up of those second life solutions is extraordinary. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar industries that have grown up because individuals have said, I'm not going to go to Primark and buy fast fashion anymore. I'm going to enjoy the journey of finding something that's a bit special that no one else has. That treasure hunt is actually fun, and it's rewarding because I know I'm doing something for the environment and I'm saving money too, right? And what's more, when I'm finished with that piece, I'm going to put it back into that system. So I'm doing the right thing and I'm declogging my wardrobe. I'm keeping my space. It just works on every single level. So we're quietly confident that all of that circular thinking that's happening on an individual level will infect the way that corporations and businesses think about what they do as well. And we've talked about circular computing. There's a clever company called Backmarket that does phones, right? You can buy remanufactured phones. In fact, you can buy a remanufactured phone from Amazon, right? Just click on the Amazon refreshed or whatever it's called. I think it's Amazon refurbished, or you can buy one from Apple as well. There's an Apple refurbished. The link is a bit hard to find because they're a manufacturer and they'd rather sell new, but you can still find it and get yourself a big discount on your tech. So that sort of thinking is really starting to come through, I think, in society. That then we hope will infect business decision-making as well, where individuals go, hang on, I've been completely circular in my personal life. You're now asking me, boss, to throw out all that furniture when we move our office. That just doesn't feel right? And have that sort of light bulb moment to go, hey, there's a better solution, and hopefully give us at Rype Office a call so we can help. Yeah.
We need more chaps and chapesses to have their moment on the 52nd floor of the skyscraper in Hong Kong, thinking to themselves, there must be a better way to do this particular thing, and therefore be inspired by conversations like this. Greg, it's been thank you so much. It's been a whistle-stop tour, but I feel I've gone from a dangerous level of understanding of all things circular to a slightly less dangerous level of understanding when it comes to all things circular. But let's conclude now with the magic wand. I'm fascinated to see what you're going to do with this in light of this conversation. If I was to hand you a magic wand, Greg, and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, I'm not going to amaze you with this. What we feel is it's all about education, right? The whole remanufacturing industry is fairly new in the furniture sector. I mean, in some sectors like photocopies, it's been going for decades. Aero engines, even longer. Cars. I mean, no one throws away their car if they have an accident, right? There's a whole repair industry that exists for that. What my magic wand wish would be is that everyone understood that the quality that can be achieved through remanufacturing of all things, not just furniture, and at the same time start to reject some of the excuses that the new furniture industry starts to come up with to try and protect their position. I think a little healthy skepticism to say, well, if you're telling me that I have to buy new, that's not necessarily the only answer.
Greg, let me ask on that, just because I think that's fascinating. What are the excuses that the status quo incumbents position when it comes to remanufactured furniture? What do they say?
Yeah, they like to play on insecurities. I mean, we've heard a lot that some of the new furniture manufacturers, when they're in competition with us, they will say things like, oh, look, you've got a shiny new office. You don't want to make it look terrible with secondhand furniture. And the term secondhand, I mean, but we all know, right? If you say secondhand furniture, even what imagery comes into your mind? It's a dodgy store in Hackney. You've got a whole bunch of refrigerators and washing machines out the front of the store. You've then got a forest of oak, smelly old oak cupboards that you go through, and at the back you find 3 green chairs, one that's got a leg missing, right? I mean, that's secondhand furniture, right? Back from the old student days some 20 or 30 years ago, right? Totally, that's the mentality that new furniture advocates will play on. But that's ancient history, right? Now with remanufacturing, we've got a shiny showroom, people can come and see, and what we find is we don't like to show the before shots because we don't like people to worry that the journey is not possible to as new. We like to show photos of what we've achieved, like the office behind me. And I've had some wonderful experiences. So there was a project we did in the south of Wales where we actually installed a whole bunch of desks that were formerly in the James Bond movie Spectre. Not a great movie, but super cool to be sitting at a desk in a James Bond movie, right? And I was putting the finishing touches on I think I was plumping some pillows or something on a sofa in this office. And these 2 wonderful ladies came in. I didn't know them and they didn't know me for reasons that, and that's important for reasons in the story. And what they said is, Susan, wow, we dodged a bullet. And I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. I'm listening, so my ears prick up. So she says, you remember, Susan, they were talking about using all secondhand furniture. Look at this. It's all new. We've completely dodged that. This is fantastic. And I'm looking around going, every single piece of furniture, including the flooring, was Second Life, right? So it's like, that's a score. So I hear here from our end, right? That's good on those women. They recognized that there was no compromise in quality. So I'm inwardly grinning and I just sort of do my business and shuffle off. But mentally, I think, wow, that's a win, right? When people can't tell the difference. And so that's what, since those days, that was very early on. Since those days, that's been our benchmark, right? If someone can tell the difference, if they're not in the procurement process, if they can walk in and say, oh, that's clearly Second Life and that's not, that's new, then we've failed. And so that's why we're all about delivering perfect, beautiful offices with no compromises.
And I love that, Greg. And I think there's something about, in terms of what you've described today in the full conversation, if the convenience of receiving that product, the price point, and then as the sort of secondary or tertiary element to realize, okay, it was conveniently delivered. The price is actually, equal, if not less than I would have paid if I'd gone for a virgin product. And it's been produced with all of these other material benefits and environmental, social benefits, etc., by being Second Life. I mean, that's a super compelling proposition for anybody. I mean, there is literally nowhere to go other than to say we're now fully embedded with the circular approach to office furniture. Greg, I could carry on, but that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and for sharing your thoughts with us. It was really, really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Charlie.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A huge thank you to Dr. Greg Lavery for joining me on today's show. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the mark of trusted sustainability communications. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.